Hello and welcome to this series of messages that I've titled Home Remedies. Our focus of conversation is really how do we go about building healthy, happy, loving relationships in our life. And by relationships, I mean not just simply marriage, although that's a central and key to all the rest of our relationships, but also the relationships with families and our relationship with those who we encounter in the marketplace and other areas outside of the home. These are the foundational things that determine whether or not your life is fruitful and fulfilling. And when relationships break down, we begin to feel probably the greatest pain that we ever experience on a psychic level. I mean, to have a marriage fall apart is devastating for all parties involved. Many times we think about the husband or the wife, but also for the children and extended family members. When we've had in our extended family divorce take place, it's impacted everybody, and myself included, because you realize that a relationship that existed in one healthy form has now been destroyed and can only continue in, at best, a repaired way, and many times that never happens. And so we're focusing first and foremost on the marriage relationship because it is the one that dictates more than any other relationship the health and the happiness of our own hearts and of the people around us. They have a vested interest in seeing you succeed. It's not just about you becoming happy or feeling loved. It's about you succeeding in that relationship. They have a vested interest in that. Well, this really came to my attention this last week when my wife and I celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. First of all, most people couldn't believe that anybody would stay together for 50 years. It's so unlikely anymore. But at the same time, a lot of our family and friends were cheering us on as if we had run a race. We'd crossed some kind of invisible line that made us the victors. And it really was that. Just sit back and look and say, over those 50 years, there were so many times and opportunities where this relationship could have crashed and burned. I mean, at any point, either one of us had given up, and that would have been the end of the story. And all I can say to you is it may be really tough right now, very difficult for you, but if you could make it to that 25th year, and that 30th and 50th year, those are great milestones, and they are the kind of things that makes for success. My father-in-law said he couldn't believe it because he had 4 children. His 2 daughters have both been married 50 years. His son would have been married 50 years, except his wife passed away shortly before that because of cancer. And his youngest son has just been married 35 years, and they have that kind of healthy relationship that you just know they're going to be around for 50 years if the Lord tarries. So these are things that, as I often talk to him, because my father-in-law oftentimes saying, I'm just an ordinary man. I haven't really done anything. I've got nothing significant. I'm not that smart. I'm not educated, blah, 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 blah. And yet I'm saying, look what you accomplished. To have 4 children, be successfully married for half a century is an amazing accomplishment. And it's not for the weak at heart. It's not for weak of will. But then again, why did that happen? Well, part of the reality is that he and his wife were married for 72 years before she passed away, almost 73 years. And again, they weren't together simply because it was easy. I remember him telling me, in fact, I just talked to him on the phone the other day, and he said he was explaining to a young man who asked him, how did you stay married that long? And he said, you just get up every morning and you decide you're going to keep your marriage vows today. And that's really what happens. You do it once a day, every day for the rest of your life, and suddenly 50 years, 70 years have gone by. So I really want to encourage you that. That's why I'm sharing these things, because this is going to be more important to you as the years go by than you can ever realize. In this age where we have what we call Dixie cup marriages, we'll try it out. If it doesn't work, we'll throw away. Or where increasingly people are just giving up on marriage altogether and shacking up as if that's a similar alternative. You can go back in some of the past series and you can hear what I said on that. But the fact is, when you look at that dynamic in our culture, you realize it's becoming easier and easier not to try, not to work hard, not to put any toil or sweat into the marriage relationship. So we really want to give you tools to help you stay in the battle and to win that war that you're in every day. Well, if you've been with us for the last few weeks, I've been talking about wives submitting to their husbands and really kind of a 3-week development of what that's actually talking about. Then last week I started talking about the responsibility the man has to love his wife. And we talked about various things, the importance of a wife showing her husband respect, because the thing he fears the most is that you would have contempt for him. And oftentimes that is the alternate emotion. Many times women say, well, I love my husband, but I can't stand him. In other words, they love him, but they don't respect him. And not realizing, by giving themselves permission to dishonor him in that way and not to treat him honorably, is the very thing that drives a knife deepest into his heart. It's the thing that he fears more than anything else. You know, the reality is I like to think to myself, well, I love my wife because the first time I saw her, she was so pretty and I couldn't resist her. The truth of the matter was, I fell in love with my wife. I saw how pretty she was, but when she paid attention to me and showed me interest, the kind of interest that says, I like you and I enjoy you and your person is somebody who's worthwhile spending time with, that's when you fall in love, because men fall in love when they're respected by a woman. And I hate to say it, but they struggle to stay in love when they are disrespected. But again, I don't want to revert back to talking about the women all alone, because we've been talking more importantly last week about what are the things that a man needs to do in order to communicate, excuse me, my nose itches, to communicate that he loves his wife. And the most important thing that Paul identifies here is that first and foremost, a man should purify his wife, washing her and cleansing her with the water of the word. And it's interesting because the Word of God is the thing that cleanses the part of us that gets the dirtiest and is the hardest to clean. In Psalm 119, I believe it's verse 29 or 19, I can't remember exact, verse 29, David makes this statement. He says, wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his ways? And he says, by taking heed to thy word. I'm quoting King James. But that's interesting. How do I cleanse my life? By paying attention to what God says in his word, by reading it, ruminating it, memorizing it, thinking about it, letting it meditate in my heart. When I begin to let that fill my brain, it changes my disposition, it changes my attitude. And so a man has a responsibility to be a spiritual leader to his wife, to model for her, first and foremost, what godliness looks like. That means that you're a man of the word. You make yourself a man of the word. You may say, well, I'm dyslexic, or I don't read well, or any number of reasons we can give not to know the word. But you see, people in all sorts of adverse conditions learn how to read the Bible. I was reading recently about one group of Christians in the third world who only had one Bible, and they would stand in a circle and they learned how to read it from the sides, backwards, upside, back and forth. Depending on where their position was, their mind had adjusted so that they could all read the word at the same time because they only had one copy. And I'm telling you that there's no barrier that you have to overcome that's greater than something like that. You can learn the Word of God. You can learn to read it and to understand it and to let it sit in your heart. There's something about reading that's not like any other exercise that we do. It has a way of imprinting itself. In fact, I was telling my staff when we do video things, I said, you need to put text underneath there because it's not enough to hear what somebody's saying. I need to also see it, because when I read what I'm hearing, it emblazons it in my mind and I retain it for a longer and deeper way. And so you really have to begin by becoming that spiritual leader. I tell men, it shouldn't be your wife who's making you get out of bed on Sunday morning to get to church. You should be the one who's getting up on Sunday morning and saying, we need to go to church, to set that example for your wife and your kids. One of the things that breaks my heart, and I know it's unavoidable for many of you, but the wife is a Christian, the husband is not, or he's nominal or lukewarm, and she's the one who's getting the kids up and going to church while he stays home and watches TV or the football game or plays golf or whatever he's got to do. And then they wonder why those kids grow up, especially the young men, and they don't want to follow Christ, because what they're doing is they're following the example that was set by their fathers. We live in a crazy time because of our convenience. We find that we don't have to become engaged in religious practice. It's not customary to wake up and go to church on Sunday morning like it is in even some parts of the Southwest and the South today. That basically we live in a culture where, if I feel like it, I'll go. If I don't. But what you fail to recognize is those kids are watching the example that you set as the father of their house. And that your daughters will want to marry a man like you, and your sons will want to become a man like you. That's one of the differences between men and women and the influence they have in their own kids, because what women give to their children is a sense of safety and security. I mean, they feel secure and stable. Moms build a home, and that home is like a nest where their kids can grow up, and they know they'll get food, they know they'll get shelter, they'll have clean clothes, and things are kept up. But what do fathers give? Well, fathers give our children a sense of identity and purpose, that we are those who set the ideal of reaching out to a higher goal. And so it's critically important that you set an example of what it means to be a godly father, a godly leader. That doesn't happen overnight. In fact, it takes a lifetime of consistent effort to get there. And for those of you who are trying to find that sweet spot, kind of the spiritual retirement zone where you can glide and abide and not have to struggle anymore, well, what I call that is actually, the Bible has a term for it. It's called backsliding. It's where we stop seeking God and we start seeking our own, and we seek our own comfort and our own pleasure. This is something that we're tasked with by God. It's a lifelong challenge. And your job is to provide spiritual leadership, in a sense to be the priest of your family, that you're guiding and leading them into an experience and a worship experience of God. Your wife may be more spiritually mature than you. She may know the word better than you are, but she can't become the leader of the home because that's not her placement by God. You have to lead. And if you have a wife who knows the word, who's mature in the faith, then access her as a counselor in your life to help you work through and grow in these areas of your life. But when you step into that role, God will place an anointing on you that empowers you to be the leader of your home, the head of your family. It doesn't mean that you have to have this overbearing personality. In fact, that's the opposite of being a spiritual leader. The fact that the prophet Zechariah told Israel that when the Messiah comes, he says, "Behold, your king comes to you riding on a donkey, on the foal, the colt of a donkey, meek and lowly." That Jesus' demeanor was not assertive and pushy, but rather it was a confidence of godliness, that he knew who he was, and he could calmly go through life, dispassionately at times, not being driven by some kind of external force, but always keeping his eyes fixed on the prize of the high calling that was before him. The very call that Paul places upon us in Philippians chapter 3. So again, Christians, I say to you, Christian man, you need to begin to accept that responsibility, not argue it away or pretend like it doesn't apply to you. You need to face up, suck up, and just simply say, God has called me, he's anointed me and empowered me, he's placed me at the head of my family, and I need to start striving to fulfill that ministry in an acceptable and honorable way. But also he says that, I love the way he gives this example, he says, husbands should love their wives as they love their own bodies. Now, you remember previously I said that women tend not to love their own bodies. I had a friend who owned a fashion business, and she told me she had all these famous fashion models that were part of her clientele, and she told me that these women, who are considered to be the most beautiful women in the world, he said, I want to tell you two things about them. Number one, she says, Photoshop does miracles. So he said, none of them look as good in real life as they do in the pictures. They all have something that's a notable flaw. And secondly, she said, most of them obsess on that notable flaw. Now we're in the age where people can do cosmetic adjustments, and sometimes I feel like people have harmed themselves. They don't look so good, but that's another story. But the reality is that why would anybody do those cosmetic adjustments? And the reality is because they don't like the face that they were given or the body they were given, as if somehow God made a mistake when he made them. When we begin to realize that, God made us the way we are because he has a place that he wants us to fit in. And that we're not all called to be movie actors or celebrities or stars, or we're not all called to have our picture on the face of some magazine, if in fact that's a calling. I won't even explore that conversation. But the whole point is that we realize that women don't love their own bodies. They're really critical. But men, on the other hand, well, quite often we think we look better than we actually do. We kind of fantasize, we look in the mirror, we suck our gut in, and say things like, I still got it, and as my wife said, I don't think you ever had it. But, that's she's watching this and laughing right now. But that's a simple reality. I remember how shattering it was to me one day when I got up in the morning and we were getting ready, and I was looking in the mirror and I said, man, I'm getting so old and frumpy. I'm losing all my muscle tone. And she turned, and as she was walking away, she just said, well, I never married you for your looks. And I thought, what? And I think it was like, what am I? I mean, to her it was like, I don't know why you're worrying about this, because this isn't going to change how I feel about you in any way. Maybe because she knows that the first thing that attracted me to her was her looks. And most women I've talked to said, when I first met him, I really wasn't attracted to him. But when I got to know his personality, I fell in love. Guys, let's just own that, that a lot of times women aren't looking for guys that have the hottest bodies, and those few women who do end up being very disappointed with what they get because they end up marrying some kind of narcissistic sociopath. But aside from that fact, we know that that's not the basis of the relationship. So if we can just step back and say, how am I supposed to understand how to love my wife? Think about the things that would give you pleasure, things that would make you happy, things that would be pleasing your sight. I discovered something amazing, that just because my wife cooked the dinner didn't mean she also had the privilege of washing the dishes. And just because she bought the food doesn't mean that she has to be the one who always prepares a meal. I mean, you just begin to find out that there's shared responsibilities. And just because I know that I need time to spend with the Lord doesn't mean that she doesn't need it also. And just because she takes care of the kids all day doesn't mean that she doesn't need a break from them as well. There are so many ways that we can be a blessing to our wives, that we can help them out. We can make the load lighter. And oftentimes we just are so caught up in what we're doing and meeting our own needs or fulfilling our agenda that we don't stop and think about, is this marriage a blessing to her, or is it just a blessing to me? That's a lot of what he's talking about here. Husbands, love your wife as you love your own body. We find it very natural. I mean, when I used to go to the gym years ago, I used to watch some of these bodybuilders, man. They were just looking in the mirrors. And I asked the guy, why do you stare at the mirrors when you're lifting your weight? And the guy said, it helps me to study my form. And I thought to myself, he's studying more than his form. He's in deep admiration of his form. And, the idea that I would spend those hours sculpting my body just so I can show people how hot it is, there again, that, like Paul said, bodily exercise profits for a little while, but godliness profits always and forever. And that's really, I think, what we need to understand is, I'm not saying it's wrong for you to go gym or work out, or even if you're a bodybuilder. I'm not taking issue with you on that. What I'm just saying is, if we build up our bodies but we neglect our souls, one day when we're older and our bodies will no longer allow themselves to be built up, then that's when we'll feel the vacuum in our soul. That's when we'll feel that spiritual depravity and that emptiness that really makes us unhappy. Well, again, this is a topic that I could go on forever and ever and ever talking about, but I hope we begin to lay out some really foundational concepts for you that, ladies, your husband desperately needs for your respect. I often say a man is a lot like an uncooked egg, that he may have this hard exterior, but if you drop him on a hard surface, he will shatter and just be a pile of ooze. And that's the way men are. They come across as being confident. Like when I was in junior high, and we used to call them school dances. Actually, we were school stand-arounds. The guys on one side, the girls on the other side. And we would dare each other to go over and ask a girl to dance. And we were terrified. What if I walk across that gym floor and ask her to dance with me, and she says, no, I don't want to dance with you? Then you have to walk all the way back in shame and derision as your buddies mock and scold you, and also secretly make a vow that they'll never walk across that gym because they fear the same thing will happen to them. That's what we are. In that sense, we're like little boys who want our mama's approval, and we're desperate to get it. We want our wives to say, I love you. And I'm just pleased and pleasured that I have you as my spouse for the rest of my life. And that's what you find that why women have babies, because they have such a higher pain threshold than men do, generally speaking. I know that if I had to deliver a child, I'd probably take gas or commit suicide to avoid the pain. I mean, it's just, as I've watched my wife deliver 4 kids, I kind of say at times it was kind of terrifying as I saw how much pain she was in. And what was surprising to me, as soon as those little creatures came out, and at first when they come out of the womb, to me they look like, space invaders, but as they come out of the mom's womb and they put that baby on the mom's breast and she's holding this newborn, this thing of just this love, and suddenly all of that pain has gone to the back of her mind, and all she can focus is the beauty of this child and this relationship. That's because God gave women the gift of giving birth. And so you just need to understand, they are a lot stronger in ways than we are. But you see, none of us are complete alone. I need my wife's strength in certain areas. She needs mine in certain areas. And it's only when we humble ourselves to that reality and become partners in sharing the battles of life that together we become better than one. So thank you for listening. And again, if you have questions, just send them in at pastor@calvaryspokane.com. And we'll be glad to help you in any way and to encourage you to find resources that can help you to grow in your faith in your day-to-day walk with Jesus. God bless you and go in His grace.